there's so many new things, so many products coming out there, so much innovation in the technology space that I think 2025 and a couple years are going to be huge. But make sure that when you see something, you understand how to use it.
Welcome to Vet Life Reimagined. I have a returning guest today, Dr. Jonathan Lustgarten. His first podcast episode was 2.5 years ago. And you know what? It's probably one of the episodes that I mentioned the most because his unique career path in veterinary informatics really intrigued me. And if you haven't heard that episode, please go check it out. I'll link it in the description. Much has changed in 2.5 years regarding technology and AI. So I wanted to see how it has changed his career and the opportunities for other veterinary professionals. Jonathan discusses the rapid evolution of AI in veterinary medicine from his perspective as a director at Mars Veterinary Health. You will hear about the explosion of AI tools from diagnostic systems to AI scribes that are reshaping the field. You'll hear about the intersection of AI and veterinary informatics and understand the broader implications for veterinary professionals, client communication, and career opportunities. So let's get to the conversation with Dr. Jonathan Lustgarten. I would love to start with just kind of the past 2.5 years. How has your career changed? Are you anywhere else? What's new with you?
Well, so I'm still at Mars Veterinary Health. I actually was promoted to director of AI and machine learning. That was pretty exciting. But I think the real impact is that the explosion of AI in veterinary medicine. 2.5 years ago, we were talking about there are some results, there are some tools out there, people are doing diagnostic AI, stuff like that. But in the past 2.5 years, it's been I don't want to call it insanity because it's not really crazy, but the volume and number of tools that either incorporate AI, had built AI for specific, or are looking to, integrate with AI systems, astronomical. I was talking to someone earlier today about 2 years ago, I went to VMX and there was one or two, maybe 3 or 4 at most, things that were AI forward. This year, just in scribes, AI scribes, there were 17, fivefold, sixfold increase, right? So it's one of those things where just for one facet, let alone all these other places we're talking about, we're going to ease of booking, we have communication, we have prompting, we have all these different, different companies like Antech Rapid, IDEX has it, the integration of digital pathology with automatic. AI is now almost you don't. AI as a portion of sin. Oh, you do have it. It's one of those things where it's where is it going? So I think that has been a huge change. And obviously it's affected me personally because people are now, a lot of people are saying, instead of saying, hey, can we have AI? Can we use tools help? How does that work? People are now saying, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Is this an AI project? One part is that, a lot of times it's no, AI is not the solution in that point. Because I think it's and this follows human medicine, new tool, shiny toy. But knowing when not to, but it's been a massive shift. And now when I talk with clinicians, because it's such a mass consumer thing, now it's there's not as much, I don't want to say reluctance, but there's not as much confusion, but there's now not as much saying why do we need AI? It's more where can we use it? So I think that's been a huge thing beyond the position. It's just overall, you're seeing new veterinary conferences pop up. I give a talk at BIS. That was about usage of AI and how to implement it. That was not a conversation I was having 5 years ago. Which is awesome. I try to have that conversation. In some places you get it, but, Association for Veterinary Informatics, we talked about that last time. More and more papers are about use of AI, responsible use of AI. So there's all these places, and that's within the past 2.5 years, not long ago. Both of us have had, changes as well in our life, but it's about just the sheer number and volume and the rapid adoption. 2.5 years ago when we were talking, we said, where's it going? I'm hoping it'll increase. Now it's how much did we increase? So it's been pretty awesome.
Yeah. So I think it might be helpful too. So when we were in our last episode and what you do, we talked about veterinary informatics, and I think it might be interesting to hear your thoughts about, is that the same thing as AI? Is it different? How do you help people understand what you were already working on, and then this buzzword of AI that's now like taking over our lives.
Yeah. And before, remember, it was machine learning. You don't say AI, the whole general,
It's scary.
it's scary, right? 2001 Space Odyssey, how, right? So veterinary informatics uses AI, uses machine learning to either analyze information or feed back information to people for use, right? The veterinary informatics, I consider informatics kind of like the superset, and there's people who design purely AI, right? So it's like one of these giant Venn diagrams. There's actually in 2009, 2008, there was a article I published on it in like One Health magazine that showed the overlap, right? Where it's medicine and it's computer science, things like that. So informatics is kind of like the bridge between computer scientists, data scientists, even those things. These all are kind of blending together. But informatics is really understanding the data and then trying to find the right tool, and sometimes building your own tool, right? Building your own AI algorithm or machine learning algorithm, interchangeable in my head at least, to do it. The only exception is generative AI. So to me, there's machine learning AI interchangeable, but generative AI tends not to be, because that tends to be more creation, right? You can use it to do things, right? You can use it to diagnosis and standard traditional algorithms, but one of its strongest thing is generating text. That's a whole subset that is still informatics, but also requires its own focus, because let's face it, it's such a new technology. What we use today, like it's a own area, but to me, veterinary informatics is trying to translate veterinary practice and information into extracting value information or value items from it, and then sending it back to the user to make informed decisions. So I use AI tools and I build some of them, but to me, it's kind of like, some people used to get very nervous about it. Now people are like, oh, it's an accepted part. So AI is kind of, again, like a tool. Your stethoscope is a tool. Your CBC machine in your clinic is a tool. Now there's, your urinalysis clinic is using machine learning as a tool in the clinic for, it's like, it's all intersecting. But to me, AI is very much a tool to use. And as a veterinary informatician, the person does is knowing, how do I use it in my scenario in veterinary medicine to give information, to find valuable information to give back to whoever your customer is.
Yes. And I'm thinking back to something that Adam Little said, and when it comes to AI scribes, he said that was the most rapidly adopted tool that he has seen in technology in the veterinary industry. And he gave several reasons. And one of them was that it was something that the veterinarian could just decide to do on their own. They didn't have to wait for it to be adopted by the hospital. And it clearly solved a pain point for them. So it was an easy, okay, I want to go home. Or when you're thinking about informatics and how the information is delivered to the veterinarian or the veterinary team, can you describe how they interact with that? Are you seeing a faster adoption with that? Can we improve in any way? How is that interaction with the team?
Yeah, so the biggest thing with veterinary informatics, it used to be, PowerPoint presentation, niche papers, things like that. Coming from Pitt Biomedical Informatics, like one of the main core courses is user interface design. And I think user adoption is a critical aspect, because it's like, if I handed you, machine code that gives you how to treat something, I'm giving you the information, but you can't absorb it, right? That's that thing. And I think what has happened is with things like ChatGPT is that they abstracted some of the more technical to make it easy to use, but that comes with its own challenges. So I think people are looking for it, but one of the things, even with Scribe, there's still time to shift. So these Scribe machines, all these algorithms, they're not veterinary specific. Some people are working on it. That will change. That's a short-term thing. It's not like just right now, at least. They're not really built for veterinary medicine. The Scribe apps, because they're going to use these large language models out there. So the problem is that when they're shifting it, right? Why did they just go use the Scribe tool? Because maybe the system they were using was very inefficient in typing. Maybe their system didn't allow them to enter as much data. It's like a stream of consciousness can work really well, but it has its downside. It's like people's memory. Like for me, I have a good auditory memory, but I know I will memorize it once I write it out. Right? And some people, when they're typing out in a medical record, they'll think of it. So there's shifts there. And then, so you shifted maybe the hard part is getting it in, but what about the review? These systems make errors, like 30%. 30% errors, 1 in 10 major medical errors. These are things that we're finding today, even with more advanced thing. Now you can do a lot of it, reduce it, but there's still errors, right? It misses ideas, it hallucinates. Is the veterinarian stopping and reviewing what was written? And I said, for simple things, particularly for the simple stuff, like the simple things that wellness again, I think the algorithms do amazing. I think when it gets more complicated, you have to treat it with caution. But what happens is that now they're focusing on time value, right? Before today, I have to enter all this information and type, right? No one says, what I love to do? I love to enter text and field. Like, that's not said. But when they have manually typed it in, they're not necessarily reviewing it because they know what they said. When they do these text things and conversion, they should go through all the manual checks, right? Because these machines are imperfect. They have high error rates. They're not for us. They're not trained on us. Even dogs are not humans with a tail, right? All that type of fun stuff that we used to say. And so, but their time value, even if they spend more time, and they've shown that in human medicine, that even voice dictation will, they may not save as much time as they think, but the time value that they spend on correcting is more acceptable to the user. That is where I'm seeing a lot of shift and acceptance. Because people say, I don't have to type it, saying, I can record it and then just quickly edit. Even if the quickly edit is longer. So my favorite thing is, have you ever tried to use your voice to text on like any of your Siri or Google or whatever? Sorry, my Siri just went off. I've had them very entertaining worksheet to my words. So I'm like, backspace does it. And I wind up backspacing it when I realized I could just have typed it out the message faster. But it's okay because, when it gets it right, with how many times you have to correct it? And can I catch it when it gets it wrong? And because the technology has become so easy to use, that now people say, I just open the site, start dictating, and it does a great job. So even if I have to spend more time, I may not have to spend more time as often. And so I found that, particularly in the informatics field, the language models have allowed people to start saying, maybe I can present this to users in a way that they'd accept that the AI generated from it. That's the other thing, is that now people expect it to be right or wrong. People expect it to be right. And that was something before was like, every AI algorithm is wrong. I'm the doctor. Now that we're seeing it as less and less threatening in some cases, I think there's more acceptance. So an informatician that proposes AI to be introduced into workflow may not have as much resistance because, I use AI in my house, those type of things are now becoming commonplace that people now accept it. And so they can focus on, the results are wrong, or I can improve it, as opposed to, are we using AI for this? And so that's been a huge paradigm shift. I think that's echoing from all community, from software design to informatics to everywhere.
Yeah. So you're right. And I think the speed of which it is improving is also interesting as well. It used to be wrong a lot, and it's getting wrong a little less and a little less, at least when I'm using it for certain things. But you're right, it still can get wrong. And it sounds very convincing when it's wrong, at least when I'm using like ChatGPT and even Claude. I love Claude too. And so it is something that we need to watch for. So that's a good call out. Are there other opportunities that you see that we can improve, or how you're foreseeing this getting more prevalent for, again, I want to stay with the veterinary team, and then I want to ask you about the pet owner too. But for the veterinary team, what are you kind of foreseeing this year and maybe the next year?
So I think our AI is actually going to hit a wall. We're going to hit some sort of asymptote, mainly because the data that we are collecting, we have, is not as robust and available as a lot of the other data in the area. So we're going to improve, and we're already seeing it. The rate of actual true improvement is more of how do we use the systems in a more intelligent way, as opposed to here's a brand new system. So there's a lot of that. I think for the system, the real next step is that there's going to be lots of tools. How do I use it? When do I use it? Who's responsible for its use? And how do I ensure that we're not hurting our pet? First off, people are asking for these tools. Talking with a lot of veterinarians, at BMX and other areas, I see people say, well, I'm actually not sure how I do it. So they're going to try it, right? And a lot of these companies, they can't do implementation at every single hospital to make sure that you're using it. It's too much variability. But I think what's going to be nice for the veterinary team is like, okay, it's no longer, is there a tool? It is, what tool should we use? How do we evaluate it? And how do we implement it? Because like, as you said, when it gets it wrong, it can be, I call it hysterically wrong, because like it comes up with stuff like, wait, what? I'm not even talking about that. It brings in some other random facts. I think having our team set up and understanding it, making sure we're not burdening the team is going to be a huge factor. Because all these tools, they, speed up some areas, slow down some others, but the net benefit of time spent means that we have to figure out, okay, are we actually saving time? Are we, sometimes when we implement new processes, it's our technical stuff that actually wind up being impacted. Are we making their job harder? Right? Some people say, oh, well, I can do it. Or what if the technician starts dictating into the record, right? During the history, people talk about ambient listeners, which I think a lot of people really like, unless you're next to a room with me, because my voice reverberates through the wall. And these are not the most soundproof walls that we have. Feel like you'll wind up being recorded on someone else's conversation. So there's a lot of things to solve, but how you do it. And I think that's what the vet team's going to have to really focus on. And that's going to be really hard because humans hasn't figured this out. And they have multi-billion dollar companies helping them solve it. I was talking with some deans over the last week. Veterinarians are not trained. I wouldn't say all MDs are trained, but the AMA says that MDs need to be trained, MDOs, at least exposed to the informatics. And that's basically what this is. It's when technology, how it integrates, how the data comes in and out, just at least a cursory understanding. Some schools have implemented more than others. I went to Pitt, so obviously more integrated. Not that I'm biased towards Pitt at all. But I think the veterinary industry as a whole, we're not being taught this. We're not being taught how to, evaluate this technology. We're not being taught of what questions to ask. Luckily, we have incredibly intelligent individuals across the spectrum, so people are figuring it out. But that means every single person has to figure it out. That's different than when I'm coming into veterinary medicine, having a baseline understanding. Like, when I use this technology, I need to make sure I understand how to measure success. So I think that's going to be a very interesting trend over the next couple of years, because there are people like me who kind of combine 2 different degrees to figure it out. But all these veterinarians who are really trying, they're going to be technology centric, but not necessarily using technology outcomes or how to evaluate those outcomes. And I think that's where over the next few years, we're going to see that pop up a lot. Responsible use. You hear that word. What does responsible use mean? Does it mean that I know when I should use it? Does it mean that when I use it, I know why it gave me the answer? All these questions that need to be figured out. And as you said, I love listening and talk. Just enough. But like from a lot of these speakers, it is the question of what does it mean to use it? So that means we're already behind the times, right? One person's going to take a decade to. I'm like, yes, but if we never start, it's only going to take more, right? So I think that's going to be an interesting push, because these tools are going to be out there. They're going to be everywhere. They're going to be integrated into almost everything. And then they're going to be like, wait, why did it do that? My favorite is when search Google, right? Been around for 20 plus years, right? When they get a search result that you type in, wait, why did it get that, right? Because the search algorithm did blah, blah, blah. So that's great when I'm searching. But if I'm trying to document on a patient and it got it wrong, can I catch it? And do I understand how I got it wrong so I don't do it again? Like, these are things I think, not just veterinarians, but the veterinary staff, all the associates, all the clinics, all these even larger companies, everyone's going to have to figure this out. And then, AVMA introduced a new committee, kind of a task force towards it. But these are very hard questions to ask because they're on a regulation. A lot of these things are not being regulated like in other life. I'm not advocating that it should. I'm saying now we have to figure out how do these people understand how to do it so they don't hurt. We're going to see that type of dynamic play out. That's what we saw in the early thousands in human medicine. The same dynamic. New tools that are going to be used. We may not understand how to use it all because a lot of people weren't trained on it. So then what happens? And it's already happening, but it's going to accelerate, as I said, because there's so many tools are out there that now people can sometimes go ahead and pick up.
Yeah, actually, you started to hit on some of my thoughts with that. So on the education piece, I mean, you were saying that human physicians were being taught informatics 2.5 years ago, right? That was already part of their curriculum. It's been a little while since I've been in school, but I still don't think we have any type of curriculum that goes over informatics, AI, or anything. And then on top of it, where are the rules? Like, I know you said, regulation, that might get a sensitive topic. You don't want to go too detailed. So there's a task force, but how do we support veterinarians in all of this legally and all that?
As an individual, we all have our thoughts. I don't know that answer, like as a definitive answer. I do know that exposure education is critical. So like I've had for years, since I actually was an intern at Red Bank under Tony DiCarlo, I have taught people about informatics. I taught people about analytics. You as a veterinarian, every single veterinary staff member does informatics. It may not be called that because informatics was a niche term, but everyone does it, right? But I know a couple people on the task force and brilliant people that are very experienced. Yeah, and luckily veterinarians as veterinary staff are brilliant. But there's the familiarity of practice and all that stuff. It's going to be really hard to keep up with and really hard without that baseline. I don't know of a way to be successful long-term without there being some sort of educational program. There's people like me, everyone has these types of platforms for learning, but these are like adjuncts. These are like, oh, you can go here. As opposed to saying, we should really try to familiarize with what does it mean to use AI? What are your responsibilities? That's the other side, as you said, legal. There are legal ramifications of using some of this technology. HIPAA compliant does not mean that your information you give them is not being used in a way, or something happens that you're not legally responsible, right? These tools are imperfect. My favorite fallacy is everyone expects automated driving to be better than humans, but humans are not very good drivers overall. I think some people feel that they're better than others and that stuff like that. But when we say, automated driving, the AI that drives the car is better than human, well, what is your metric? They must never have an accident. I'm like, that's like, you can only be so much better than, what you're trained as a baseline. And if they're using people who drive as their baseline, then they're seeing lots of people who make mistakes, right? So these are things like, what is an acceptable level of performance? How do we measure it? And that may be as a population. As you know, a pet is not a population. So when I have a reference range, I may not be, the pet should be within it, but maybe that pet is different, right? Or maybe there's subtle changes within the reference range of the value that I measured that signify some sort of disease, but still normal, right? These are things that I think we're going to have to figure out with AI. It's going to require a lot of people, a lot of time, which is why, things got on hold in humans a long time ago. But I do not know of a way to do it without education programs that support people in this and take the veterinarians and give them time to focus and learn these type of patterns. Right now, we have luckily very smart people that are figuring it out, but how many 120,000 veterinarians in the United States, let alone, how many more hundreds of thousands around the world? A lot of them are not spending time, but everyone that uses software that has AI is going to be impacted.
Yeah. And I think you pulled out an excellent point too, is for every patient is an individual. And that is where the human element of all the schooling that we went for comes into play. It's taking the data, including AI data that gives us, and looking at the patient that's in front of us and saying, does this make sense for this patient?
Exactly.
And so it's putting it all together, pulling in why we're here and what's important. And also kind of going in that direction of the individual patient. One of the trends that some people are talking about is this client-centric shift in veterinary medicine. How is AI and all the things that we've been talking about going to impact the client? How is it going to touch them? How are they going to feel about it? Do you have any information so far from that population?
So there's already stuff like, all the wearables, all that stuff today. And there's lots of really cool wearable technology out there that is like, here's alert, your dog may have an issue, right? False positives, false negatives, and stuff like that. None of that stuff is generally published. right? So you can't really evaluate it, which leads to skeptics in the veterinary community, as well as skeptics on the client side, right? So I think there's stuff is already out there. I think from like AI-driven, interaction with clients, I think what's going to be interesting is the new chatbots that are coming out. I think that's going to be a huge area. One thing I do think for client is the ability to relay information in a different way. One of my favorite things about like these, large language models like ChatGPT, stuff like that, you write something, you're like, it doesn't read right. You can actually ask the language models to rewrite it. And that's actually where it excels. It does a really good job at changing a tone, at changing the language you use. Write this for a high schooler, right? Write this for a college student. Write this for a veterinary student. I should try that. I mean, it's quite entertaining what they think of that level is. No flaws in there. But I think some of that ability to explain things, the ability to review, if I've written a paper, I've written a response, you just ask, are there areas in this email that look unclear? Still veterinary side, but impacting client communications to be very quick. Imagine all of us have bad days, right? I write terse text, or I, say, hey, sorry, can't help you, right? The client may not be as forgiving on those days. We're all human, we all think, but a lot of times we see veterinary burnout because there's a lot of angst and tension between it. Imagine a system that could flag the tone may be a little bit more harsh. So that's still veterinary side, but it's interacting for the client communication. I think on the client side, the understanding what was said, that being able to book appointments through virtual and digital, I call it like automated appointment booking. I think there's a lot of people that still want that. I think that's an interesting dynamic there. Probably has a whole episode dedicated to it. But I do think a lot of clients are like, oh, should I go? I actually don't know if it's still there, but there was a WhatsApp that was built to help the client understand, is this a serious thing? Should I call my vet or not? Those are the types of things I see that are going to be developed for the pet parent. The wearable are already kind of approaching that, right? When a wearable says, hey, your pet may be in pain. We've seen them, struggle to sit or 3 times over the past hour. You should call your vet. That is a AI device that detects about the pet and advising the client to contact the veterinary. That type of question and answer, that type of, I call it like pocket vet, going to be more and more there, because on the veterinary side, I'm sure you've had the experience. You may not say to the client, oh, I wish you'd come like 3 days ago and your pet's been in pain. You may not say it because you don't want to make them bad, and they may not have realized it, right? That's part of why wearables have such a good attraction. Well, the client is not a trained vet, and they may not know that, oh, an older dog that is struggling to get up may be in pain versus, oh, that's just being older dog, right? Those are two very different statements. You may not know. And so having these types of systems to help them assess it is going to be a huge demand, I think. But again, the line of practicing medicine and giving medical advice versus saying, hey, and so what do most people do? Oh, anything you see, you should go talk to your vet. I think that defeats the purpose of what we're trying to do to give comfort. The other thing is, I was actually just talking about record exchange, being able to have your own records. Imagine a system being able to query your own records on your phone and pull out the information that maybe you're at emergency vet because something happened. All that. I think that is also going to be more and more expected. But it has to be done very carefully, because these are, a dog is not a small human, right? People can only relate to what they know. And so these software systems could be developed to improve them. But I think it's how they do it and the way it's trained. And as I said, we're going to hit a barrier with our data to train it, because these systems are not set up. So there's really smart people that spend a lot of money and time doing it. But that's because they have to compensate for a lot of the information that we're storing and using, because this is going to be a need and a desire. And that's where that tension of having veterinarians who understand and help with why to record the data, I think is going to be very important for us to succeed. But I do think the client app is where I think there's a lot of benefits that we can have and a lot of things that we can be able to use and do. But the last thing we all want to do is say, the pet seemed fine, and then something, tragic happened, right? But it may have happened no matter what you did. But everyone's going to point to the AI machine as the one that did it, even though You asked 100 vets. It's the 101st that would have said, oh, no, actually, maybe that's the sign. The other 100 vets would say, oh, that's fine. Or the technician that they spoke to said, no, what? Well, you can monitor at home and, come in. Seems reasonable based on what they said. You have the systems. They spoke to a person, they documented it. Do these chatbots or whatever they have to talk about, do they record that interaction? I mean, my favorite thing is you have all these chat things, you have all these things people text. They go into your system. You have that record of that interaction. Is that interaction reviewed? Because these things are going to be, even though they're not technically offered as advice, no matter what you put the disclaimer, they're going to take it as advice, right? So can we do something to make sure it's safe? And that's where the knowledge of understanding of what these systems are doing really comes into play.
So what I hear is a lot of communication improvement from a lot of different angles. One, from connecting to potentially something that could be wrong with the pet and communicating it to the veterinary team. But also some of the things that, a handful of years ago was such a hot topic for us to talk about on improving our communication with clients. Now we have tools that help us do that, whether one, we're in a bad mood and we can make it sound better, or because I think when you know a lot of things, it can be hard to communicate that in a understandable way. And one of my favorite examples that I heard actually at a veterinary innovation summit was a veterinarian used it to explain a disease process in the terms of basketball because she knew the client loved basketball and it did it and he got it. And so something like that, that's a really cool tool that we can use. And like you said, that's something that it does very well. Again, there are some challenges. And I think sometimes our expectations of these tools is high. I like the car example because if you look at the percent of accidents of people driving, extremely high, and we expect that a self-driving car should be zero. But I understand it because it's scary. It feels out of our control. And when it's out of our control, we need it to be perfect. And so again, it goes back to being a tool that we can use to improve our overall flow and hopefully health of the pet. One of the things that you had mentioned in our last episode was trying to make sure that we are not data rich and information poor. I liked that phrase. Yeah. Do you feel that we are getting to a point where we are more rich in the information side? Is AI helping us there, or do you still have this concern?
I think it's starting to. Looking at the number of systems that have AI to help extract information and find you what you want, it's still very low. So I think we're still on the inverted side of having a lot of information in our system, just not able to recall it. The 3 R's, right information to the right person at the right time. That's how you become information rich. I think our systems are helping pull some out, AI and generative AI and extraction and all the fancy things, making it easy to consume. All that still hasn't been applied to veterinary medicine, right? They haven't been applied to human medicine either. But it's not like we're behind. It's just probably a little bit away. But I think we're getting there because I think their tools are now more centric on presentation of information, not just getting information. So I think some of the AI stuff that we're seeing is helping that get that information. But I still think we're inverted. I still think we have a lot of data. And when I say and data rich can also be applied. Is it good data or bad data, right? But we're going to skip that discussion. Just about other topics. But I do think that the data rich information poor is going to be there until the system can help feedback. Clinical decision support systems are still very rare. And they are hard. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's people who spent their whole lives building clinical decision support off of the data in the EMRs. And our humans in that struggle, right? A lot of it comes down to, we'll just build a lot of rules, right? And talk to human physicians about how much they love the rule systems in their EMR, right? So we have to do it right. So I don't think we have flipped it, but I think the tools that are being developed offer a larger potential now than ever before. Just as I said, because I can convert it from one thing to another, right? I can convert from maybe what a clinical pathologist would write as a long thing, and I can help it summarize. as long as that summary doesn't mislead. And that's the part where it's like, we have those tools that can do it, but can they do it correctly? Can they do it accurately? And for some people, the good people who say, oh, I look at that doesn't seem like what a clinical pathologist would say, and goes back and reads the original. And how many people are doing it? And that's where you get the responsible. But I do think the baseline technology is here now. I think it has to be customized and built out. But I do see that we are developing the tools, which is why I'm so pro-education, because we need as many people who know how to help develop the tools as possible. I think we're developing the baseline tools, and now it's how can we refine it and apply it. Personally, I don't think we're there yet, but the past 2 years have seen more progress towards tools that are more generally accepted than I've seen in the prior 5. And so I think that's super exciting for me, because that means that we're starting to have people who want to say, how can we use it? Instead of trying to convince people, should we use it? I think that paradigm shift is what will drive more of the data rich to information rich.
Oh, and one of the things you had mentioned early on is it can be a shiny object and people want to use it for everything. Is there something common you've seen people try to use it for and you're like, no?
So for me, I like it when it summarizes a document. But be fair, bias. I've been trained in this. I've been doing this for 2 decades, right? So I have a different perspective. But to me, I think the use of document summary, the use of transcription can be done, but it's almost like when they take a yellow and black book, the grid notebooks, like when
Oh, Cliff Notes and Spark Notes, all those. Yeah.
those were good, but those are written by human, but even them being this stuff. This one is so, as you said, speaks so confidently that I worry that when it's really sensitive or really technical, people are using it and not realizing that it doesn't actually know anything about that area to the level of like understanding. So when anything technical, highly technical or highly specific to a discipline, and you're not using a model for it, I always say, I would not use it. Or if you do, say, use it as a high level outline, but do not copy anything in. Make sure you read the source. And I feel like until we have better hand on it, I think we're going to get in a lot of trouble. So I tell people, like, if it's something that you are an expert in, don't use the silly language model, because unless they downloaded your brain and we're like in a Johnny mnemonic type phase, then the tools are not ready for you for what you want to do. I think it's great for high level. I think it's great for like partial bullet points, but anything super technical, I always go back. And same thing with transcription. If you're dealing with a complicated case, if I have to read the record more than once, these systems may not understand it because we've been trained in it and these systems are not trained. So more simple stuff, I may be more reliable, but if it's something that you're questioning, the system is not going to necessarily be better. So don't just use it, and don't just objectively use it. And then also one thing I say, do not use the system if it has someone's information. There are places like Azure or, the AWS, Amazon has their own thing for it. It's a private, and there's all sorts of stuff with that. But going on the chatgpt.com and putting in someone's personal record, they summarize it for you, you're giving, it's not ChatGPT's fault, you're giving that company personal information on client. Most of the time they get censored and stuff like that, you don't see it, but they have no thing. And they have shown that people using ChatGPT will have another person have that information pulled up for them with the same query, not even in the same company. So you have to be very, very careful. So if you have anything that's sensitive, unless you have specifically set up privacy and, siloing, do not use these public tools. That is a way for you to get into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, actually, that was a tip I learned at VMX just this past week, is that there is a way in ChatGPT you can actually go in and say, do not train on my data. And so it's a way to have some more security beyond it. I still wouldn't put sensitive information, but at least it gives you an extra level. So that's nice. But yeah, basically everything is free for them.
Mm-hmm.
What did they used to say is nothing is free. If something's free, you're the product, or something like that.
Right. Exactly.
I think that education piece is probably what we're going to keep coming back to, because there's so many different tools you could use. Some are better for other purposes. The ones that I know we've got some out there that they're specifically fed data from veterinary textbooks or something like that. So knowing what tool you're using and how it's been trained, I think is important. Any thoughts there before I go slightly adjacent?
Well, no, I think you said it best. And I think it's the understanding, the impacts. The problem is education, like what do we educate? And I think that requires some discussion, but yeah, I don't see us going forward without an ability to do education as we go. So we're going to hit a wall because it's going to be the people who understand and the people who are veterinary practitioners until we start building that bridge with people who are cross-trained. Maybe maybe a little bit more bumpy than we want it to be. But I think the tools can do a lot. So, what were you thinking about going adjacent?
Adjacent, and actually maybe even the education part may be part of this answer, is one of the first questions I asked you is how has all of this maybe changed your career? How do you think it might change careers in veterinary medicine?
It's very interesting. So first off, primary pathways is one thing. And then the second thing is, what do people do after they've had a career in veterinary medicine? I think both of those are going to be huge because you know what? People have been practicing for years, right? They'd like for you to be able to transition to this type of advisory role or this type of situation that becomes a core to the product. Sometimes you have like, oh, here's a veterinary advice. They work for pharmaceuticals, whatever thing that I think this type of technology as advisor is going to be a huge new pathway for veterinarians, either to start with their career, because some people want to become vets and then say, actually, I like the research part or I like the ML AI part, right? Application. I think that for me, what's going to be very interesting that there's going to be a lot of people who are, 10, 15, 20 years in, are going to be like, well, I can actually help this. Now, I practice, I really love my clinic, but now I can do this. I think that's going to be very exciting for a career in our veterinary industry because there's going to be such a need for people who understand what the information is telling you and what, quote unquote, should be the output of these systems. It's going to open up a whole new career post medicine that I don't think existed before that.
Yeah. And I think on so many levels, not only the medicine, but learning how to teach leadership, like all of these things that each of these roles could go in and start helping training models that can amplify what they know, I think is really exciting. You are far too easy to talk to. I think our hour is up. Any final words you'd want to leave people about 2025 and technology?
One thing about 2025 is that I think the new and shiny is going to be awesome. But I also think don't be overwhelmed by the shiny. Make sure that when you look at the product, don't just rely on the sales pitch. Try to understand what it's doing and focus on whether you can adopt it. Because one thing I worry about is people pulling all the software, then realizing it doesn't help. Not because the software or the technology is bad, but because the way the hospital operates or the way they want to implement it just doesn't jive. So for me, it's like explore, keep reading, go to conferences like VMX, go to conferences like VIS. Love VIS, it's one of my favorite conferences. Go to all these conferences where these technologies and these companies are presented. But also make sure to understand that when someone says they can do this, that's great. And you may say, oh, we can use that. But how you use it, where you use it, make sure you don't get too distracted by the shiny because a lot of these things, they're not zero cost. And also they can impact you in ways you're not expecting if you're talking about, oh, I can do this. There's so many new things, so many products coming out there, so much innovation in the technology space that I think 2025 and the next couple of years are going to be huge. But make sure that when you see something, you understand how you use it.
So don't jump full force into anything without a little education. I like it.